When the LEPs were originally announced, there was some confusion as to how they would be funded, what powers they might hold, and what influence they would have. And I think it's probably fair to say that those members of the LEPs themselves probably had the same view. However, over the past 2 years, we are seeing greater collaboration between the devolved regions and the local authorities, and between local authorities and LEPs. And indeed, and this is particularly relevant in the Northwest, where I have the experience of it, we're beginning to see neighbouring LEPs work closer together on regional initiatives such as transport strategies. Now, these regional bodies are undertaking a more holistic view on regional development and growth. New funding routes are becoming available, which will present both challenges and opportunities for all our members, irrespective of size, across the country. This greater collaboration will also have big implications for procurement and industry capacity in terms of labour and materials at regional and devolved nations level. Now, much has been said, and we're all familiar about the two different economies in the UK, one being London and the other being everywhere else. Now, in actual fact, regional variation goes a bit further than that simple analysis. And it was only yesterday I was looking at some figures that had been recently released by Glenigan, and what they were looking at was the top part of the country, the northern part, where they identified 3 specific regions, and they looked at the total value of work won by the top 10 contractors over a rolling 12-month period, and they were particularly citing the rolling 12-month period ending at March 2014. Now, in the Northwest, that figure, contract awards, was 1.74 billion, and that was 12% higher than the previous 12-month rolling period from the month before, i.e. the 12-month period ending February 2014. Now, the comparable figures for Yorkshire and Humber region was 877 million, and that was a fall of 15.7% over the previous month. And for the North East region, the figure was 535 million, which was broadly the same as the previous period. So what we have here is across the north of England, we've got 3 neighbouring regions of broadly similar size and demographics, which show a difference in workloads of between double and triple the lowest figure. So this is testimony to the statement that one size does not fit all, and each region needs to carefully consider where it is in the marketplace in terms of skills and resource requirements. So this session, I hope, will present delegates from firms across the size and breadth of the supply chain with a clear understanding of the changing future role, project funding potential and business opportunity of the devolved nations, local authorities and the increasingly influential LEPs. So in this context, I'm delighted to introduce our 4 speakers who will approach this subject from slightly different perspectives. I'd like to first of all introduce and welcome to the stage Kevin Rowan, who's the Head of Organisation and Services at the TUC. And Kevin's background is across England and Wales. I think he spent more time in the north than the northeast, but that's by the by. So if I could ask Kevin to come up.
This discussion is often portrayed really about national versus local governance issues, central government versus local institutions. And my starting point really is that's a pretty false argument. I think for me it's always a question about how different parts of our governance infrastructure can collaborate more and work together more effectively to deliver better outcomes for the UK as a whole. And even in Lord Dayton's comments this morning, he was talking about the need for greater collaboration between the kind of destination hubs of HS2 and central government in order for HS2 to be a successful programme. So it's absolutely relevant and contemporary debate. And for me, it's very clear, if the economy and quality of life grows in those northern regions that Mike talked about, then actually that's the UK economy growing as a whole. And often we talk in very kind of localised debate about progress in terms of economic and social progress. So my first point, I guess, is that we need to be really careful to avoid polarising otherwise common interests in the debate, and it's very easy for us to do that because often it becomes a war over funding, and to kind of locate this discussion in project funding or other funding can be often negative and destructive and fragment the debate at the start. So we need to be careful to talk about this as a whole economy debate rather than something that's about local versus national growth. I think the second point I'd like to make is that what we've got now just doesn't work in. I mean, I think we are, as Mike was indicating there, seeing economic disparities between regions growing at a faster rate than we've seen for a generation. And the assumption that I start with is that that's actually not a good thing for us to be witnessing. It's great that the London economy and South East economy is booming, but an overheat in London comparing with stagnant growth in other parts of the country, apart from a few notable exceptions, isn't a situation that I think that we can be proud of. There are, of course, disparities within regions and between regions, as Mike was saying, and those are growing too, those disparities within regions. Even if we look at things like house prices at the news this week around the house price growth, very clear, massive increase in disparities there. But employment, GVA, pay, and of course, as Mike was saying, capital expenditure between regions is just emphasising, accelerating that growth differentials. And it would be easy and very tempting, especially with Bob coming on shortly, to revisit the situation of 10 or even less than that years ago and talk about RDAs and the difference they made. But I think actually it's more productive for us to concentrate on the here and now and to discuss current policy levers for local economic growth and how they hopefully have some discussion moving forward about how we can change those things to address that prevailing trend of growing inequality. And again, Lord Dyson referred to the regional growth fund this morning as being a great success, and certainly, it's hard to argue against the theory of the regional growth fund supporting those winners and those kind of capital growth projects as a mechanism for kind of generating those local economies. But it is a centralised driver of growth, and it's been slow and it's been ineffective. Less than 500 million of the £2.6 billion budget actually reaching projects in the 4 years or so, or just under 4 years since its launch, with a major slice hanging with intermediary firms. But for me, too little focus on capacity and too little focus on cohesion, both locally and nationally, to deliver on those best intentioned projects. And like you, I speak to employers and local authorities and LEPs who all share those frustrations. They think that the Regional Growth Fund is a really great way of rebalancing the economy, but all of those barriers, all of those difficult, sometimes technical issues are real anchors on growth. And of course that is, I think, a reflection on the local economic infrastructure. As Mike was saying in his introduction, LEPs established fairly shortly after the coalition came to office. And I think if we're honest about our analysis, we would all say that it was a bit rushed, probably a bit botched, lacked focus. And that's not intended to be a criticism of LEPs at all. I do talk to members of LEPs and LEP chairs pretty frequently, and they're pretty committed, hard-working individuals giving up their free time in a lot of cases with no reward in order to try and drive their local economies forward. But the process by which LEPs were introduced and the way they've been put under pressure initially without any meaningful resources, for me, demonstrates a real lack of commitment to local economic governance from an inherently centralist regime. And I think there is a genuine commitment in what LEPs are trying to do nationally and locally. But the LEP infrastructure, from my analysis, remains devoid of a geographic logic, has insufficient capacity and insufficient power to influence. And there are questions still around accountability and stakeholder engagement. But they do have clear advantages. They've brought together at a local level powerful voices and new voices. And I think it's important and good that we do have that range of new voices engaged in economic development. But where we've seen economic development successfully occur outside of the metropolitan hub, it hasn't been driven by LEPs, it's been driven with LEPs, and we've seen the most innovative and successful local economic growth being driven by innovative, creative and strong collaborations of local government. They've been the key in those local economic growth areas. So I share the view that we need to reform the local infrastructure, but I take the point that was made this morning around trying to maintain momentum and not throw out the baby with the bathwater and damage what we're doing. So we do need to tackle, I think, local governance issues, and I think the conference is being held at an interesting time where a few weeks off manifesto commitments being settled, so the debate is very live at the minute, and we're very much hearing particularly from the Labour Party, the sense that we need to decentralise and integrate much more public policy at a local level, including around economic geography and economic growth. But what changes might we want to make in order to try and maintain that local infrastructure but improve on it? And I think there are 4 or 5 key areas just to finish. One, I think there's an inarguable case to make LEPs much more geographically logical with a degree of flexibility but focus around those travel to work area economies. The way in which LEPs emerged was a pretty incoherent and in my view badly managed process. Secondly, I think we need to make sure that LEPs are able to deliver on the challenges that we set them. So they do need to clearly have a much greater increased capacity through a more effective relationship with local authorities, or more likely, I think, through combined authorities. Thirdly, we need to focus on impact. We should only be supporting local economic governance structures that have the scale to make a difference. And I think, all of that kind of argument about balancing economies, it depends on having a scale outside of London and the South East to make a difference. So focusing LEPs around scale and delivering that impact is critical. And I would, you would hear me, expect me to say this, I guess, ensure that they're inclusive. I think stakeholder engagement has been a bit of an optional extra for a number of LEPs, and some LEPs have made great attempts to try and improve that, and I think there is good practice in some areas, but for some LEPs it's been a bit of an optional extra, and I don't think that's helpful. And finally, I think we need to make sure that there's a degree of skin in the game. LEPs need to be accountable for what they do in the same way that other parts of our local governance infrastructure has, perhaps through city deal arrangements, through combined authorities, perhaps through more direct engagement in appointing LEPs, but they need to have some skin in the game so that they're accountable for the success or failure of what they do, as well as committed to it. I'll leave it there, Mike, and happy to take some questions later. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. So Kevin's view is whole economy, not regional, not national v regional split, regional importance, LEPs, okay, but could do better. So it'll be interesting to hear from our next speaker, Robert Hough, who is the chair of Greater Liverpool City Regional LEP. He also holds a number of senior positions with Peel Holdings, and in fact, anyone who visits the Northwest, where there'll be very few major pieces of infrastructure and development that hasn't in some way been touched by Robert's hands over the years. So I'd like to introduce Robert Hough.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Mike says, chair of the Liverpool, it is greater, of course, but it's in fact the Liverpool City Region Local Enterprise Partnership, and also a former chairman of the North West Development Agency. So I've seen both sides of this boundary. I've been a director of Peel Holdings, main board director since 1986, a long time, seen the journey throughout many interesting phases. As you probably know, big investor in property and infrastructure in the UK. I'm currently chair of Peel Airports. We own 3, Liverpool, Doncaster and Teesside. Today's event is all about investing in infrastructure. And I certainly believe it's an absolute necessity for the UK, but also a driver of local economic growth. And quite simply, without investment infrastructure, growth doesn't occur. It's no coincidence that outside the southeast, the strongly performing city regions of Liverpool, Greater Manchester and Birmingham are well connected. And the poorest area in terms of GVA per head is Cornwall, because it is remote. And that's just an illustration of the need for effective infrastructure. I must also congratulate the organisers of the conference today, because I'm sure this was quite deliberate, but it was 120 years ago today that Queen Victoria opened the Manchester Ship Canal. And that is an example of sustainable transport, actually, because it is still going strong, pivotal part of Atlantic Gateway, and that was the day in 1894, 21st of May. In the Liverpool City region, we are currently witnessing about £1 billion of investment in infrastructure, no doubt helping to massage and contribute to the figures that Mike referred to in the northwest of England. And that includes the Mersey Gateway, a £600 million scheme which connects Halton, Runcorn and Widnes, for those who know it, a locally financed 6-lane road scheme connecting industrial and logistics centres and therefore driving that economic growth, and also providing congestion-free access into Liverpool itself and the national motorway network. Vital indeed. And just to give you a very quick snapshot of how we see our LEP, we concentrate clinically and with pace and delivery, I hope, on 4 key growth sectors which play to our natural strengths. Superport, which you've probably heard of, I won't go into more detail. Low carbon energy, building on offshore wind into the Irish Sea. The visitor economy and the knowledge economy, which includes advanced manufacturing, and not least Jaguar Land Rover. Quite a simple strategy, really, but and focused at what happens and what actually works in Liverpool City region. We're also witnessing, in fact it's a Peel Port scheme coincidentally, investment of about £350 million in Liverpool 2, which is a deep berth port to accommodate 95% of the world shipping fleet post the widening of the Panama Canal. And that will give the opportunity for that port, Liverpool, to be the port for the north. And that brings goods into the north of England, close to their destination, and closer to the supply chains. Currently, 90% of containers entering the UK come through southern ports, Felixstowe and Southampton particularly, of which half head north of Birmingham, and therefore this will avoid that long journey, I think the extravagance of that time and cost to the ultimate purchasers of those goods. Those are both nationally significant schemes, essentially based on infrastructure, based on transport, but creating jobs in the local area. Not just transport for transport's sake. This is all about driving people into work. Liverpool has around a shortage of around 90,000 jobs in the Liverpool City region against the national average, and this will help to redress that balance. So it's not just goods to market, it's about more people into better paid jobs, and that is one of the keys behind our strategy, emphasising those natural distinctive strengths. But also transport and also infrastructure, not just about connecting areas. It is also, in our case, enabling sites to be developed. In our local growth fund, which has already been mentioned, we put in the majority of our bid there into transport projects. That's partly because the DFT are funding most of the local growth fund, and therefore we match the contributing government department. But £111 million of our bid going in now is for transport schemes, and that will to enable sites to be developed for, and that will be job creating in the process. You won't know the area, but around Knowsley, for example, industrial park, pinch points there, open the site up, more development, more jobs. And similarly, the Halton Curve, which some of you may or may not know, but that would be to restore a piece of railway, a stretch of railway, and connect the Liverpool side of the Mersey around Knowsley particularly, with Chester and beyond. And that will be a fairly small scheme which wouldn't otherwise have happened, but it is in our bid for the Local Growth Fund, and I hope it will work. There's a fair force behind it all. Just in terms of that Local Growth Fund bid, because it might be interesting to know this, because it is a real deal. I mean, it's already referred to city deals this morning, but we've got to show the business case for those deals. We've got to show the time frame for delivery. And May 2015 is a key point in all this. We keep being told what's going to happen by May 2015. What's the level of endorsement from the private sector? How many jobs are created? What's the leverage between private and public sector money going in here? And what's the risk management process? And how will it all be managed going forward? And this is what Greg Clark and Lord Heseltine this afternoon, that's what he's saying to us on a regular basis. This is a hard-nosed negotiation to get that local growth bud into government. And we feel we've got the right mix of schemes there to deliver jobs and to reflect the originating government departments. I mentioned infrastructure, the importance of it in Liverpool, and I emphasise it again. And we've got 5 key strategic projects in our broader strategic plan, the local economic plan. One of those is access to the port. Building this new port, £350 million investment, it's essential those goods get to market quickly. It's going through a congested area of Liverpool, it's politically sensitive, residents' interest involved, and to try and find a way through that, those conflicting interests to make sure not only we build the port, but we build a road network which connects the port to the ultimate motorway, and that's critical. Those who have travelled down the M62 in recent times, might to Liverpool, will have seen that massive development taking place now on Amiga. There's 6 or 7 enormous sheds going in there for Asda, Travers Perkins, Hermes, Brakes, and 1 or 2 others. The colossal amount, and thousands of jobs have been created there on the back of that development, which is in Warrington actually, just to give it its credit there. As far as I'm concerned, the LEPs, and clearly there are conflicting views and they come in different shapes and sizes with different agendas, it is all about creating growth in the economy and driving forward that and finding the solutions and recognising the opportunities to bring forward the big ideas. It might be I just want to touch on 3 very quick ones finally, if I might, and one has been touched on already. What's a LEPs all about? And they're all different and come with a different agenda. All have very limited resources, and what should LEPs focus on? I think that's a very fair question to ask of a politician. It's a fair question to ask of a LEP itself. Secondly, I think it's interesting to understand how do you bring forward the big transport schemes. These things, I mean, Mosey Gateway, for example, the £600 million scheme, that started 20 years ago, which is quite a short period, actually. If you look at that in context, 20 years for a scheme of that size is really quite on the short side. But what we found is continuing advocacy, certainly engaging the private sector, identifying the technical approach and solution, and having the momentum and leadership behind it through whatever government is in power. And that's the key, actually, because that scheme has ridden through several governments, several different administrations, but it has worked through those qualities to which I've just referred. Secondly, I think the devolution of powers and freedoms and flexibilities, as it's sometimes called, is interesting. Government do set, and we are probably in the most centralised administration structure anywhere in Western Europe in terms of the centralisation of power and decision-making into Whitehall. And notwithstanding the fact we have combined authorities, which we now have in Liverpool, that still remains. Government do say that they wish to devolve powers and freedom and funding opportunities into the regions, and particularly into those areas which either will have in this current government's case, a combined authority, or else a economic prosperity board, perhaps according to Lord Adonis. But even with those in place, we don't see much evidence of that devolution of flexibility of powers and funding there. And even though the monies are passed, they come to us in a ring-fence form, and the discretion actually to take forward those opportunities is really very limited. Or indeed to deviate from national policy, and we in Liverpool would like to have a streamlined planning process for waterside development adjacent to the River Mersey. We haven't achieved that. We hope the combined authority will be the platform for that development, but who knows? But my final comment really is this, that it is the private sector to whom we look for the drive, the initiative, and the association to take forward the big ideas, the tidal fence across the Mersey, or for Liverpool to become an energy self-sufficient city on the back of what's happening in the Irish Sea, or hydrogen, with which we're very keen to see progress, linked to what's happening at INEOS. Those big ideas driven by the private sector. So we want to hear the private sector's voice clearly. We want to hear it loud. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Robert. One of the key points, obviously, is that infrastructure is a key driver for growth. And Robert went through a lot of interesting, exciting projects that are going on within Liverpool City region. What is quite interesting as well, of course, is one of the points that Robert picked up on. It's not just regional significance, but it's national significance, because what's happening here is it's actually reconnecting the Northwest and hence the rest of the UK with the rest of the world. In some of the developments that are going on will have global significance. All this work, of course, brings about it some key challenges in terms of procurement. Some of the organisations involved are not as familiar with some of the more modern procurement methods, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome as our next presenter, Professor David Mosey. David is the Director for the Centre of Construction Law and Dispute Resolution at King's College London, and will be giving his views and thoughts on procurement methods.
I am a lawyer, sorry about that. I was in private practice for a long time. I've just reinvented myself as an academic. I'm a lawyer who has always said what you can do, not what you can't do. Whether going into academia radically reduces my ability to make things happen or not, we will see. I've worked with local authorities and devolved nations at a strategic level. I co-led with AECOM, then Davis Langdon, the government's National Change Agent programme in housing. I'm working with the Highways Maintenance Efficiency programme now, worked with Scotland and with Wales on employment and skills initiatives. But I'm not going to look at it, change and improvement in procurement at a strategic level. I'm going to look at it at a local bottom-up level, linked to the government construction strategy and their trial projects programme, the things that they're proving on individual projects, that groups of local authorities, wider regional groups, LEPs, devolved nations, can then hopefully take forward when the proof has been offered to them. And I'm also going to link this to the launch of a joint venture by ACE with the Association of Consultant Architects in relation to some contract forms that are very dear to my heart, the PPC and TPC suite of contracts. Please don't groan, please suspend disbelief that contracts can actually contribute to the processes for delivery of better value. The three things I'm going to focus on that I think regions and devolved nations need to be helped with, getting through the red tape of EU procurement, or indeed doing something interesting after EU procurement, to get at opportunities for SMEs and local businesses, which EU procurement doesn't let you do, whatever way you look at it. Understanding the relationship between value and real cost, whether that's in terms of achieving savings or controlling the effects of inflation, and creating complete teams that do bring in SMEs and local businesses. So quite a lot to squeeze into a short period of time. I think on all of those, a revolution is overdue, and I think, whatever your politics, the government construction strategy and trial project programme is that revolution, and the ACE-ACA joint venture is part of that revolution as well. It's a procurement and delivery revolution. It's linking the procurement process to the project delivery process, and it's saying, after you've entered into contract, whether it's single project, strategic, long-term, you need team building, thinking, planning time, and you can rework your EU procurement supply chain to explore properly the savings, the jobs, the more sustainable solutions, or whatever, innovative solutions, and the opportunities for local and regional businesses. And if you don't do that, you get what you've got invisibly through the EU procurement process, and the chances of maximum local and regional opportunities are lost, because as clients you can't see them, as a supply chain you don't have an opportunity to build them up and to look at them carefully and to get a proper team together. So those contract forms embed those processes. They have a two-stage approach. They have the facility to develop, whether it's at a project level or a strategic level, long-term relationships down all levels of the supply chain to actually bring in people's contributions. And through the trial projects, which are testing NEC, testing JCT Constructing Excellence, testing PPC and TPC, those are all recommended contract forms. It just happens that some of the trial projects, the majority of those, have shown that the PPC and TPC contracts have delivered savings that have been agreed at all levels of the supply chain, not squeezed out of people, have delivered local jobs, have delivered improved warranties, have delivered opportunities for local businesses. And those trial projects are published on the Cabinet Office website. I'm going to look at one regional example. There is an excellent trial project in Liverpool, but I'm choosing Surrey, which may seem a less challenged region, but it does have challenges in terms of having to win votes through sustaining the local economy and having to make the money go further, having entered into commitments and then faced a load of inflationary pressure because this bit of the country is subject to a bit of an upturn. Project Horizon is their trial project. As I say, it's available online. You can download it and look at it. They delivered 15% agreed savings, not procurement squeeze, agreed savings with Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And they broke them down. And if I had time, I would tell you exactly how they did it. But they combined that with a 10-year warranty on their roads, with increased recycling, reduced landfill, and with increased apprenticeships. They did it. The proof is there. It's not just made up. It's independently audited. So in terms of something to build on, that's being taken forward by the SE7 group of local authorities. The same principle has been picked up by the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities, and HMEP, Excellent National Initiative, is launching guidance in June on the Supply Chain Management Toolkit, which shows exactly how anyone can do it. Now, it's not exclusive to PPC and TPC. Of course, you can do it under NEC, you can do it under any form of contract, but those contracts spell out those processes and make it a lot easier for people to pick them up and run with them. And as it happens, Project Horizon was delivered under that TPC form. So just a little plug for King's College. Additional to the HMEP guidance, there is King's College guidance, also free, available online, Cabinet Office website. Again, not partisan to contract forms, but spelling out what a contract can do after EU procurement to take a long-term relationship and make it better by getting down to the level 2, level 3 supply chain members working with the level 1. At some levels, you'd say that's pure common sense, there's nothing magical there. To actually embed it as a mainstream, proven way of doing things without having to reinvent the wheel every time is a major breakthrough. So do please have a look at the stand. The ACA have got a stand out there with some details. They've got little brochures, and the brochures give you the online connections. Do have a look at all that. You can get hold of the King's College guidance. And so I said as a can-do person, this is what you can do to help, and this is what consultants in the room can do to help local authorities, regional groups, LEPs, devolved nations, not be constrained by EU procurement to the great big organisations, to actually regenerate their local economies by looking intelligently at the Tier 2 and Tier 3, to make sure that the cost they pay is the real cost, whether those costs are rising or coming down, and to generate jobs and apprenticeships along the way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. So I think the important message coming out from that presentation is really that the entire supply chain needs to be engaged and kept engaged throughout the duration of the investment process. Our final speaker in this session is Michael Batherham. He's a director of WSP. Michael's going to give a comment on how the region should perhaps be looking at procurement I don't know if that's from a non-SME basis, Mike.
My role is engaging with local authorities and LEPs across the country, and I think one of the two key things that they're looking for from government is really greater retention of finance locally, and secondly, more control and flexibility over how expenditure takes place in their localities. And it was interesting to hear what Robert had to say in relation to what's happening in the Liverpool city region as an example of how they're targeting their investment strategies to meet local circumstances, priorities and needs. I think it's also important to note that the actual case for the investment is rested upon international experience and also UK experiences, which I'll talk a little bit about. I think it's interesting to note already, it's been mentioned about a gross value added of the city regions across the country. And it's interesting to note, aside from Bristol, every single city region is performing below the national average. London is at 130%. So there's a lot of catch-up, and they're performing at around 80 to 90% of the UK average. So actual investment in those localities is going to be essential to create growth, is one of the key tenets of the discussion and debate. In terms of the actual paperwork that sits behind this debate, people will be aware of the Heseltine report, No Stone Unturned, and a lot of the experiences were actually drawn from Liverpool City Region, as you would understand. Also, there's an interesting report being produced by the Core Cities, which does a lot of work around comparison to international examples. And of course, there's also the Investing in Britain's Future, the paper produced by the government, that also supports this approach. So I think the other important thing from an ACE point of view is that if we secure greater growth, it's already been mentioned that will also result in the growth, the prosperity in the regions, which will result in a greater call upon our services. So actually it's in our interest to help and assist those local authorities in pursuing those agendas. So first of all, just looking at the retention of finance locally, international comparisons indicators I've already mentioned. In Canada, they retain 10 times as much finance raised locally within their area, and the case in America, it's 7.5 times, and in Germany, 6 times is retained locally. In the UK, 95% of the income that's generated locally goes back to central government. The second point really is around expenditure, and it's estimated that 75% of the spend locally is actually dictated through central government policy and controlled centrally. And obviously localities have been seeking that greater control of their expenditure to target their particular priorities and their needs, and therefore secure greater growth locally. It's interesting to note we've already seen examples in Manchester has been referred to in the northwest as an engine of growth, and their earn back a model where that investment is already transforming the city. And it's notable the amount of work that's actually happening there, and that's all about supporting the enterprise zones, the growth of the city, airport city and so on. So it's a very, very important example there. And I think the trend is definitely set to continue. So we'll see increased expenditure on major highway schemes and through the local growth funds, which have already been mentioned, and they're targeted very much about supporting that growth. Again, international comparison, 65% of the expenditure is controlled below sub-central government in Canada, 45% in Germany, and 40% in the US. In the UK, we're down at 25%. So significantly lower. Just some of the examples, I think, of where this local investment has actually reaped rewards already. Robert's talked about Liverpool City Region, so I won't talk any more around that and the investment strategies that are taking place there. We've also seen in Leeds a focus, around legal services and supporting that through training, education programs and so on, targeted towards those particular areas. Birmingham, similarly, digital economy, health research, and so on. Investment actually is very much focused on that and through their city deals. HS2 has been mentioned, and I think HS2 is probably a primary example of where the local regions and city regions are trying to ensure that they're at a proactive position responding to the proposals at a national level. Birmingham, Greater Birmingham, Solihull, LEP and the City Council, Birmingham City Council, Solihull, are all in the process of driving through changes and master plans for their station areas. One's called UK Central around Solihull and the airport and the new HS2 terminal, and then the other one in the city region is a master plan around Curzon Street, which people probably be aware of. Again, examples of where the local authorities are trying to drive that through, and having greater freedom and flexibility in their finances will assist them in being able to deliver those type of strategies. The other thing I found, I've spent over 20 years in, previously at local government and now in consultancy, and it's very, very complex and very confusing, the numbers of funding streams that are available. As an example, in housing, there's 36 different funding streams available, which just makes it very, very difficult for local authorities to be able to actually respond to their particular needs in their area. I think it's also fair to say that the local authorities would prioritise, perhaps in many instances, the investment strategies different to what's suggested by central government through the funding streams that come available. Okay, so just really in summary, what are the benefits to the ACE and our membership around this debate? Well, if we do see greater investment happening in the regions, which is what where the agenda's going, and greater freedom and flexibility over how investment takes place, then there will be an increase in demand for services. So there'll be increased demand for advisory services, and that'll be to provide support and strategy development on all the sorts of topics of infrastructure, energy, waste, environment, transport. I've been leading a project in Birmingham on a long-term vision for the city region, transport strategy as an example, and there'll be more and more demand for those services. I think the second thing is there will also be a greater demand for services around the planning of that infrastructure, and actually also helping to progress local authorities through the statutory processes. So Transport Works Act orders, all that sort of services that are required, development consent orders and so on, to actually get these projects through the process. There will also be an increase, as you would expect, in design services. Through a switch in emphasis towards the city regions. And just to note as well, myself, I've been involved in a number of different projects which are around this sort of topic. Interestingly enough, Port of Liverpool study I was involved in, and again that was all about unlocking, as has already been mentioned, the capacity of the highway and transport network to serve the port and to facilitate growth in that city region. Work around HS2 in Leeds and Sheffield, again that was targeted about trying to respond to the proposals and ensure we maximise the economic benefit of the station facility as just examples. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. The importance of regional expenditure controls. Very important. I think we're going to have to call time just now. So I'd like to ask everyone to give a vote of thanks to all our speakers for some very interesting and informative discussions.